PHP coders, today we're going to create a simple yet secure PHP login form. Whether you're a beginner or an experienced developer, this guide will help you understand the core concepts and best practices for handling user authentication in PHP. Let's dive in. First, you can see I have created a login form. It is a simple form with labels and inputs for a username and a password, and a simple submit button to submit the form itself. We have a method which is set to post, and the action of the form is index.php. This is actually our current file we're working in, and it will submit to the same file. If we're going to take a look in our browser, it looks like this: a simple username, a simple password. We can type stuff in it and we can log in. You can see if we log in, it's submitted to the same page, it reloaded the page, but nothing happened yet. Let's fix that. If we want to log in, the user has to give his username and password. And to check if those are correct, we have to compare them to the username and password stored in our database. But first, we have to make a connection to our database in order to fetch the results needed. So at the top of the file, we're going to open a new PHP tag. And inside this PHP tag, we're going to make the connection. First, we're going to set our variables with the needed credentials to make the connection. So we're going to say we have a MySQL database where the host is localhost, and the database name we're going to fetch from is login form. My database credentials are username of root and an empty password. Of course, if you're doing this at home, enter your own username and your own password of your own database. Next, we're going to make a try statement in which we're going to make a simple DBO database connection using our DNS username and password. And if something goes wrong, we catch the PDO exception and we'll die the page because there's something really wrong if we cannot get a connection. Let's save this and refresh the page. If everything is correct, we can see there's no error here. If something was wrong, our die would trigger and we would see it on the page. Next, let's fetch the user credentials from the database and see if what the user has entered is actually correct. First, we're going to make an if statement, and this if statement checks if the server request method is post. In other words, if the user had submitted the form using the post method, then this would be equal to true. Next, we'll fetch the username and the password from the post global variable and save those in our own variables. Then let's create a simple SQL query. This SQL query will select all the users where the username is equal to this variable. So instead of actually string concatenating the username into the SQL query itself, we're going to use something which is called the prepare function. If we would not do this and we would string concatenate this to the query itself, the user, because the user decides what is saved in this variable, can enter SQL queries inside this variable. And if we just blindly string concatenate them to our own query, the user could say something like drop table users, and it would execute and our whole user table would be dropped. To prevent this, we use the prepare function. So instead of string concatenating, we use this colon flag. And next we prepare the statement with the prepare function. And then finally, when we execute the statement, we say at the execution, username will be replaced with the variable username. But this execute function combined with the prepare function will make sure that this variable username will be escaped and unquoted in such a way that no executable SQL is left inside this variable. Finally, let's fetch the user record from our executed statement and save it in the user variable. Now all we have to do is check if the credentials are correct. So we create a simple if statement, and in this if statement we say if user. So if this user variable is true, then we can assume that the username the user has entered is indeed present in our database, so it is a correct username. Next, we have to verify the password. And because we have not plain passwords stored in our database but password hashes, we have to use the password verify function to rehash the entered password by the user and then compare them to the hashed password in the database. If the password verification is correct and the user exists, then the user is successfully logged in. If this is not the case, the user has entered invalid credentials. If this is the case, we will simply echo a statement to the user, invalid username or password, please try again. However, if the check is correct, we have to create a new session for our user and store the user ID in it, so other pages can also check if the user is logged in or not. We start a new session with the session start command. Next, we'll add a new value to the session global variable, which will hold the user ID. And the user ID we can get from our user object, which is straight from the database. After that, we will relocate to the protected page you can only access when the user is logged in. And after a header location, we also should do an exit. This password protect page is a page we have here, and let's say logged in. Let's go to the browser and let's test some things. Let's say test and test123 login. This is not a valid username and password or password, and we are prompted to try again. Let's say Mark, which is a valid username in our database, and let's add the wrong password. When we log in, we see again invalid username or password, please try again. If we do the correct username and password and we press login, we are redirected to the protected page.php. However, if we now clear our cookies, which is our session data, and we refresh this page, we can always see this if we know the correct address. This is because we do not have any logic in our protected page to check if the user is actually logged in or not. To check if the user is logged in is actually a very simple check. We create some new PHP logic at the top and we start the session because we want to read the session value we stored earlier in the index page right here. We have to start a new session, and when we have started the session, we can fetch the user ID from the session global variable. If this is not set, however, we know the user is not logged in, and then we'll redirect back to index.php, the login form, and we exit. If we save this and we go to our browser and refresh the page, we can see we're instantly redirected back to the login page. And if we try to go to the protected page, we can see we are redirected immediately back to the login page. However, if we enter the correct username and password, and we are redirected to the protected page and we stay at the protected page. Even if we go back to the index page itself, and then we go back to the protected page, it's still stored in our session, still stored in our cookies, and the page knows we are logged in. And that's how you create a simple yet secure PHP login form. Leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye!